Kimi Antonelli has now gone on to win 3 in a row. The only driver in Formula 1 history to take their first 3 career poles and convert them into victories. Adding on a couple of funny statistics so far in the season between really the 2 Mercedes drivers, Kimi has now also gone on and lost positions in every single race start he's had, from sprints to races, which has been 20 positions lost and 0 gained. But then he went on to win by 43 seconds in Miami against George Russell. And what's also funny is Kimi's longest winning streak is bigger than George Russell's longest podium streak, which I just think is a pretty crazy statistic. Clearly, George has been struggling from a driving style perspective, a mentality perspective, but what's been going on? Let's break it down detail by detail. Talking about the GPs, because I don't think he's forgotten how to drive, obviously, but something is clearly going wrong where the younger 19-year-old Kimi is taking a lead against who's pretty much a veteran driver right now, George Russell. Let's talk about it. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and subscribe. I know you guys love these driving style videos. Sport's been amazing per usual. Means the world having you guys here. Make sure to like, subscribe to the video. Let's get started. Obviously, there's a lot of change with these 2026 cars. Some people hate it, some people don't. And I really do think it favors drivers that have been in the sport for less amount of years. Your Ali Berriman, your Isaac Hadjar, and of course, Kimi Antonelli, who have only driven for 1 year as of right now. These cars are obviously lighter, they have less downforce, a bit more agile, and energy focused. So the new style demands precision over smoothness. Obviously, having a mastery on how you deploy, I think this goes more along the teams rather than it does on the drivers, because it seems to be pretty computer based. I don't think the drivers really control this. Where they do control this is how much tire spin they do and how precisely they are going into these straights, having those better exits rather than prioritizing the entry. And I also think, which is a big key factor as to why Kimi is taking the lead as of right now, is that adaptability to a more slidey nature when the cars are in this real low downforce spec as of right now. Maybe towards the end they'll be a little closer to not being as slidey, but with the lower weights, smaller tire width, the car naturally will have more slide, and controlling that will take you much further. But the gaps have been very telling, and it's not just amongst George Russell and Kimi, it's really amongst the grid. These gaps have been bigger than usual. Some drivers just like to drive these cars, others do not. So in qualifying and in the race, we are seeing bigger gaps than usual. In Australia, it was pretty close. I do think the gap was somewhere between a 10 to 3/10 if we look between qualifying and in the race. George did end up taking the pole by about 3/10 on Kimi Antonelli. It was a front row lockout, pretty easy for Mercedes, and Russell had the better deployment going down into that back straight and in the medium speed corners. That was where he was taking his advantage in sectors 2 and 3. In sector 1, they were pretty similar. So in those slow speed sections, Kimi could keep up with Russell, but where we've seen more slow speed sectors, that is where Kimi has taken a stride ahead of his veteran teammate. In China, Antonelli, pole, youngest ever. I'm not really going to compare this because Russell was hampered by an issue. I think otherwise this would have been much closer, and maybe even George could have taken this pole. He had that whole front wing thing happening in the very first part of Q3, so he only ended up having 1 lap while Kimi had 2. But in Japan, this is where we really saw Kimi come alive. He took pole by 3/10, and not only that, in the race, he was pretty dominant. Yes, was he lucky with the safety car? Yeah, definitely. He ended up having a 15-second lead over Piastri by the end of the GP. But if you look at race pace, George was never even close. He couldn't even get on the podium. And the gap was pretty significant in race pace, being around 4 to 5/10, sometimes even more depending on the stint. A lot of this was coming out of the hairpin. The exit was much more prioritized by Kimi, just having more deployment, not having as much wheel spin as I was talking about. This is really where the driving style of these 2026 cars is dominant. Yes, it's not something that I adore to talk about, because before you were rewarded taking a bit more risk, even if the car was sliding, but you could get on that throttle quicker, that could help you out in certain corners. Nowadays with these 2026 cars, having wheel spin, you are wasting a lot of that battery. That is where Kimi is better. His throttle modulation, getting onto that throttle quicker while also not spinning the wheels as much like George, is gaining him a lot of lap time and giving him more deployment over the lap. Not only that, I don't think George is actually getting a lot of tire spin. It's more so that he's driving very conservatively while Kimi is driving very free. Part of this is mentality. I think George has a lot more to lose this year, while for Kimi, he's just going to go balls to the wall, go all out, which is also pretty fitting for their driving styles. Taking a look at some Kimi onboards, very aggressive, loves to move the wheel back and forth, has a bit of oversteer. Both drivers do adore that, but I would explain Antonelli in a more go-karting style, where he puts the car completely over the curb, which is now helping him in these 26 cars that have a much higher ride height than the previous cars, and is definitely a more aggressive driver rather than on that smooth style. Now in contrast, George Russell loves to drive very smooth, pretty straight-edged, V'ing off the corners, prioritizing exits, which is something these 26 cars do like, but if you do not have the confidence to step on that throttle quicker, then you are bleeding lap time from the start of the straight to the end of the straight, where Antonelli is just taking over in these slow to medium speed corners where confidence is key. George has not had it. I think a 0.3 gap, okay, pretty big, but what was happening here in Miami, it was clear to see that George just does not have that confidence. In Sector 2, particularly under that bridge, that very slow sector, Kimi was just gaining on him, and that exit was always so much better. Way less wheel spin, was way less conservative than George was, and was gaining a lot of time. Even Sector 1. Sector 3, they were pretty even. Sometimes George even had the lead over him, but it was in Sector 1 and 2 where just the telemetry was showing a big gap amongst the two drivers. In race pace, by the end of Miami, 0.8 is what Kimi was dunking on Russell. This was a big gap and just shows how little confidence George has in his driving as of right now. He's got a lot of belief. I actually still see him as the favorite in this season, but I gotta say, Antonelli has really impressed me how he's adapted to these cars in comparison to a veteran teammate. George has driven very slow cars, medium speed cars, and now the quickest car on the grid. I do think he's a driver that has easily the potential to win. If you take a look at this 2020 to let's say 2026 era, George Russell is in top 3 of those drivers. I'd probably put him, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen. You can argue that even Lewis has been up there for some seasons, Fernando Alonso, maybe a couple others like Norris and Piastri, but those 3 are typically what most people have in their top 3. Tracks like the upcoming Canada should suit the style of George Russell. I think this is where he can make his comeback and really adapt again and get into that same rhythm. Mental strength is something that's not really talked about in driving style, but I do believe that plays the biggest factor in confidence when you are going through these corners, and whether you can step on the throttle faster than your teammate or competitor. And right now, George has that same problem that I believe Lando had in 25. He's got more pressure. He knows the championship is open and there for the taking if he can capitalize. Kimi, while probably thinking about it, it's probably in the back of his mind until he has a bad weekend that could make him struggle like Oscar Piastri in Baku later on in the season. But as of right now, the mental is on the side of Kimi, and George has to change that momentum because for Mercedes, having an Italian driver, being this young, winning championships, they will side with the younger prospect rather than the older driver who's struggling. That is just the natural way of business. So George has really got to lock in and get back into that same mentality he had in the previous seasons where he was dominating even a 7-time world champion. I don't think Kimi's been lucky by no means. He's been better suited to these 2026 cars. He's adapted much quicker than that of Russell, and I do think he's got to evolve before this title fight gets really out of hand. But credit to Kimi, who I think has been destroying him, to be fair, these last 3 races. Can it continue? Well, we'll have to see. I don't think it's going to be as big of a gap, but I do think Kimi's got the mental advantage, and that's going to be huge for the rest of the season. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you believe George Russell can change his driving style to adapt to these cars? I do, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. Please leave a like, subscribe, it would mean the world, and peace.